Could you tell me a little bit about your background, starting with a bit about your childhood and where you're from?
Okay. My name is Caroline, as you may know, Caroline Kithinji, and I was born in Kenya. I was born in Maseno. And the story I'm given by my parents is that my mother woke up my grandfather at 6 a.m. in the morning to take her to hospital. And the only bus that was available was a school bus. So there she was, a pregnant lady and myself and the driver. And we went to Maseno and I was born. Now, my mother was in the university at the time, and in the 60s, you couldn't be at the university and be pregnant. So she left me. She actually hid her pregnancy from the administration and then left me with her mother for 2 years. Then after 2 years, they took me and I lived with them. So I have been born in an all-girl family. I'm the firstborn. And growing up, we always knew we would go to the university. It's because my grandfather would always say, when you go to the university, not if. So it was a given. And when I got to university and I was done, I knew that I didn't find that remarkable at all. In our days, you had to get a certain grade to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so my grade was just to do a general science degree. And I'm glad I did it because it's far more interesting, I think, than being a doctor. Although, of course, I could have gone into research as a doctor. I have enjoyed research tremendously. I started off with trypanosomiasis research, mainly in animals. We didn't do much human trypanosomiasis research because there was not much human trypanosomiasis in our country. Very little, almost eradicated. Then from there, I moved to Kemri. And I had a 4-year stint where I was not working. I was a career housewife. And then I reapplied for a job at Kemri. And I thought because I'd done molecular biology, that's likely what they were going to ask me to do when they saw my CV. And they just asked me, would you be interested in being on the ethics committee? And for goodness sake, I had no idea what that was. But I said, sure, I needed the job. And that is how I got introduced to ethics. And I must say, I wish I had done it straight out of the university because I think by now I'd be far more experienced. And it was something that suited my personality to a T. Not too much laboratory work, a lot of meeting with people, communicating with people, a lot of dynamism in the field, and a lot of interpretation, which I enjoy. So I don't know, I think I've hopped, skipped, and jumped over my childhood, but I don't think there's much I can say extra.
Well, I guess I just have one follow-up question, which is, sometimes when we later find what our life's work is, whether we really chose it or whether it happened to us, looking back, events in our childhood or in our formative years in our youth take on new meaning. Do you think there's anything about, who you were becoming when you were a young person that made you predisposed to be good at this work or like this work?
Yes. As a child, I was always very interested in why people did things. Yes, the intention. I wasn't very much concerned with the action, So if somebody lied, I wanted to know why they lied. I was not very interested that they lied. I've grown up always saying that, your intention matters more than what you actually do. And it's so interesting that in the Bible, there's a story of two people. One, they were both asked to do something. One person said, yes, I'll do it, and didn't do it. And so one person said, no, I'll not do it, and then did it. And they were asked, so who's the one who was obedient? And of course, it's the person who did it. But then I'd ask myself, but why did they say no? And why did they say yes? So when I came into ethics, I realized that, yes, we need to do research, but why and how? What's our intention? Is it to exploit people? I've just come from a session where they're talking about biases that people put towards races and decide this race is more intelligent than that race, or trying to connect genetics to behavior. And yet, your behavior is affected by more things than genetics. And I think that's why I liked ethics, because you don't just do research. It needs to have social value, it needs to have scientific merit. Why? Why are you doing it? Yes, and if you can answer the why, usually everything else, for me, falls into place. Yeah.
I think that's true. Yeah. And so could you describe what it is that you do for work now?
Yes. Now, I have about 10 people in my department. When I started at the Cambridge ERC, we were 3. And we were doing all the work that we are doing today. And I remember just the other day, somebody was saying, why don't we do it this way? And I told them, we used to do it that way, but we couldn't cope because we were too few. But now there's you to do it for us, so you might as well do it the way you think that it makes more sense. So the kind of work that I do is actually, we run a paper-based system, so everything must be locked down in a book. So when the proposal is received, it has to be written down somewhere in a book. When it goes to the agenda, it must be written down. When we finally have the meeting and we are writing the letters, we distribute the letters in the agenda to various people. That also has to be written down. So I kind of just make sure that the production line is moving. We have regular meetings when things get stuck. And I said, what happened? I said, I learned something, that there are no mistakes in life. They are just lessons. So I ask people, what's the gap? And what's the lesson? And how can we do it better? So that's essentially what I do. I no longer do the actual receiving. I do review proposals for the meeting. I do communicate with the PIs. But the real routine work of an ethics committee secretariat, I don't do anymore. I have minions. Yes, young people who I always remind that I could have given birth to, so they need to respect me, who do a lot of that. So that's what I do. I communicate a lot with the PIs as well, and of course with the administration, with the bosses.
And I imagine when you began this work that you were doing more of the minions work.
Yes, I was a one-woman show.
Could you talk a bit about what it was like doing that work and how you've learned from that and how that informs the way that you supervise and manage now?
Well, it was a lot of work. We would have an agenda sometimes up to 50 or 60, and I'd have to write all those letters, and I'd have to sign them all. That was quite something. But what I learned, now that I'm now not doing it, is when the PI would come to the office, and I'll tell them, oh yes, we reviewed the proposal, a few issues, I'll get you your letter, just sit there, because I was the only one doing it, so I didn't even have to say, come tomorrow. If I could do it now, I'll just do it. When they'd be so, so happy. I mean, some of them would even go on their knees and say, thank you. And I realized, for me, it's a piece of paper and my salary at the end of the month. But for this person, it's their life. It's a very big part of their life. And then I thought, if this is so important to the investigator, how much more is it important to the research participant? And how much more is it important to the field of science and to the country? So even at the very beginning, because I was doing everything myself, I realized that this is important. It might not look like it. And I often tell my minions that it doesn't look like, it just looks like you're shuffling papers from one place to another. But these are people's lives you're holding in your hands. And how well you do it determines how well the end result is going to be. So every so often I need to remind them, because it can be a bit humdrum and routine and boring and mundane. Yes, but when you realize that this is not a paper, I tell them, this is not a paper, this is a research participant. This is a young scientist trying to develop. This might be the person who's going to find the cure for cancer. So come on, a bit more respect. Yeah.
It sounds like you've had a lot of concern and thought about the big picture even throughout your career working in research oversight. Do you think that how your ERC functions is similar to or different from other Kenyan ERCs?
I must be honest and tell you, I have no idea how other Kenyan ERCs operate. Maybe when I go back this time, now that I've been made coordinator and I have lots of people to work for me, I just might be able to, expand my knowledge and one day just call and say, hi, can I come over? And let's, or invite them over. We do a bit of cross-pollination. So there are a few people on our ERCs that are on other ERCs. And the latest one we've gotten from another ERC was just amazed at the number of proposals reviewed and the level of discussion in the meeting. And I thought to myself, okay, So we are doing something right. Because I got a bit frustrated when I went to the Johns Hopkins for 6 months and I went to their ERCs, to their IRB meetings, and listened to the level of their discussion. Then I came back home and I thought, oh, goodness me, what are we talking about? I didn't even think we were discussing ethics. Then I realized if somebody could comment, that means we've grown. In fact, when I was sitting in the room, I was thinking about growth and maturity. And I was saying, yes, our ERC has grown in the number of proposals we review, in the number of people in our ERC, but have we matured? And then I asked myself, but what's a mature ethics review committee? And I don't know, somebody should answer that question.
Do you want to give it a try?
You see, there was somebody who was saying that today in one of the sessions that they had a great IRB. And from what I could understand is that he was talking about drugs, and he was talking about cancer. And he was talking about, it was one of the keynote speakers this morning, and how their IRB allowed them to do various things that would not have actually been allowed by any other IRB, I presume, because they were trying to look at some very rare cancers. So they did something called basket. I don't really understand it very well, but in the end, how they did it, the smaller cancers, they were able to get drugs for those cancers, which if they were to ask for a randomized control trial just for those cancers, there would be not enough people. There'd be like 18 people, and people say, oh, that's not generalizable. But see, the thing is, for the people who have the cancer, it's so important. And so he was saying that they had a great IRB. And that's what made me start thinking about what's a great IRB. I would like our Cambridge IRB to be called a great IRB. And I think part of it is communicating openly and transparently with the investigators and not being very superior and not pretending that we know the answers. Yes, we're the Ethics Review Committee, but no, somebody else might bring up an ethical dilemma or a solution, and they are not members of the ERC. So I think being open to other people's thinking and not thinking that you know it all is probably one of the things I would say would be a sign of maturity. And being flexible. It's easy to be rigid and to say, no, do like this, and this. If you don't follow these rules, then it's not ethical. But you can maybe not do all of those things, but still be very ethical. Yeah.
Are there circumstances that come to mind in your ERC where your board has been called upon to use some flexibility or outside the box thinking to allow research to progress in an ethical way?
Well, when we were doing research with MSMs, men who have sex with men, we allowed that the informed consent documents could remain within the confines of a clinic, rather than giving the participant a copy to go home with, because we knew it was unsafe for them. So that one, we just said, sure, no problem. Our consent document for the MSMs, again, never mentioned homosexuality. We all knew that's what we were looking for, but we just, made it very general. Just report anybody who reports anal sex, and we left it at that. So those are things which, in an informed consent document, when you're trying to be very clear and to disclose everything so that it's very clear in the informed consent document, obviously our informed consent document was not very clear. It was deliberately obscure. And that way, so that we could protect our participants. Another way, we allow some flexibility. In many parts of our country, you can't consent an individual. They will come in with their whole family. So you cannot say that, oh, this is supposed to be private, it's supposed to be confidential. I mean, if you don't allow the whole family in, then you're not going to consent the person. So you know that autonomy, somebody's not supposed to have any outside constraints on their decision. And here you have people in front of you having a discussion. And you can even see that the participant is not very keen to be in the study. But in the end, as the conversation ebbs and flows, she agrees to be in the study. So you might want to say, then why do you accept them? If they were, you can obviously see shows the conversation has led her to saying yes, but that's the way they operate. And interestingly enough, it will be disrespect for persons not to enroll them into the study, because when they go back home, they'll be in trouble with their friends or their community, because they all came for the meeting, they all came for the informed consent. So those are some of the ways where we've been flexible. When we think of the Belmont principle and the spirit in which it was given, autonomy, self-rule. Yeah, that one is other people rule, but I don't know. So that's how.
Right. How do you think there's a language we could use to articulate an interpretation that takes the spirit of respect for autonomy and allows you, when you're exercising that flexibility, to be following some regulation? Can a regulation be drafted to encompass what you just said?
I wonder. I think we should just leave it as it is, because meaning is internal and individual. At the session yesterday, they were talking about training. Fogarty International Center, the way they have various training around the world. And the lady who was representing Asia, Pakistan, she sounded a little bit frustrated, because she says, when you teach it, you think they've understood it the way you've taught it, but they've understood it in a totally different way. And I've had that frustration myself teaching ethics. We talk about it, I give as many examples as possible, but in the end, everybody's seeing what I'm saying through their own lens. So I think we just leave it as it is, much like the 10 Commandments. Just say, do not commit adultery, and that's it. It's up to you now. What you decide adultery is, what you decide committing is, it's just up to you, but it just remains that way. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned your experience teaching ethics, maybe to your own staff or to others. And when you do, and when you're dealing with these ethical sticky wickets, how do you gauge success in teaching those principles? How do you feel like, oh good, I have communicated this satisfactorily to my students?
Not by the exam, certainly. When you give them the exam, they replicate word for word what you taught them. So you know they didn't understand anything. They just memorized everything you said. But once in a while, somebody will say, can I take your email, Mwalimu? Mwalimu means teacher in Kiswahili. And they send you, say, I want to do this and I want to do that. And I was wondering, if I do it this way, will it be ethical? And I'm like, okay. So this is somebody who, yes. And many a time, it's those students who are just very quiet, who just sit and listen to you from beginning to end. They have very few questions. They're the ones now who are trying to internalize your message. One thing I'll try and do more is try and talk about ethics again just in life generally. Because once you talk about it in relation to research, people put it into that box. But I think respect for persons, yes, you should respect anybody. You should try and do good. You need to be fair. You know, those are things which are just generally in life one should do. But I get this feeling sometimes when I'm teaching it that people just think it's because you want to do research. Yes. So I think I'll change it a little bit, just to maybe give some examples just out of real life, so that the students can realize you're just supposed to be an ethical person. Yes. Not just because you're enrolling people into a study. Yeah.
One question that Joan often ponders, and she's talked to me about, is, can ethics be taught, or is it something, like certain behavioral characteristics that has to be learned at your parents' knee when you're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? Is it an innate sort of quality, or can we have courses on ethical behavior aside from just, compliance and following the rules?
Well, how do we learn to cook when your parent teaches you? Not if you go to school. How do you learn to make a cup of tea? Mostly, you're 2 years old and you're tugging at your mother's skirt, and you see her going to the sink, putting water into a saucepan and putting it on the fire. Then, in your little 2-year-old mind, you're wondering why suddenly she's added milk. Or why didn't she add milk immediately? And then it boils a bit more, and then she throws in some tea leaves. You might wonder, why did she put in 1 teaspoon? Why didn't she put 5 teaspoons? And as you grow watching her doing it, you're learning how to do it. And that is why I feel, particularly for IRBs, I don't know what we do about researchers, but particularly for IRBs, you need to be part of one so that you can see it being applied. Because you see, ethics must be applied for it to be real. Otherwise, it's not real. Respect for persons is not real until you apply it. And until you get a challenge applying it, that's when that concept really, you understand it. So, yes, you can teach ethics, but it can only be learned when it's applied. I think there lies the rub. And for many people who learn ethics and don't apply it, then actually they were taught, but they didn't learn. So the doctors, we were discussing this in University of Nairobi in Kenya. I was asking the doctors who are part of my secretariat whether they were taught any ethics, and they said no. They were given a few case studies, asked, what do you think? What would you do? And that was about it. Yet, had they been taught and then asked to apply, by the time they left medical school, they'd have a real good handle. But I don't know what happens in nursing school, because the nurses seem to have a good handle of ethics. Don't ask me why. Maybe it's because they spend more time with the patients and the patients' families, and they can see some of these things playing, the dynamics of everything. So yes, ethics can be taught, but for it to be learned, it needs to be practiced. So, and practiced on a daily basis. You need to be able to think about it each time. And I always tell my students, please think about it. When you wake up in the morning, yes, you're a lab person, you're just getting blood from somebody. Before you draw the blood, ask yourself, am I respecting this person? Is there benefit to this study? Ask yourself those questions. If you ask yourself those questions, you'll force yourself to act in a manner that is congruent with the questions you asked yourself in the morning. So as my grandfather used to say, don't behave like a cow. Cows don't pray. Wake up in the morning, eat grass, produce milk, go to sleep. Don't behave like a cow. Think about what you're doing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Don't be like a cow.
No.
I'll try to keep that in mind. So here at a primer meeting, for example, a lot of what we discuss has to do with the interaction between federal rules and regulations and research oversight. And I'm sorry to ask such a maybe simple or obvious question, but how do you think the Kenyan government interacts with research oversight as a project? What are its opinions and how does it direct you, or how much are you figuring it out yourself?
The Kenya government is silent on ethics. We exist by implication. This is how it is. The Kenya Medical Research Institute came into place in 1976 after the East African community broke up. And suddenly all the common institutions had to be Kenyanized, because before it used to be East African, this East African, that night had to be Kenyan. So Act 260, Cap 260 of our Act, of our Constitution says that we are going to create these parastatals that are going to do the following. So there was trypanosomiasis research, there was medical research, there was agricultural research, veterinary research, and so on. Now, because the Ministry of Health, we are under the Ministry of Health, gave the mandate to KEMRI to do research, by implication, it means that there had to be an ethics review committee, because you couldn't do research without having an ethics review committee. But nowhere in our Constitution are we mentioned. Our chairman sometimes says it with a light touch that we are probably operating illegally. But he said that might not be so bad. And I think I do agree with him, because from the talk we had yesterday in our session about another country where they're trying to, another whole continent where they're trying to put things into the Constitution, they've become very restrictive. So the law can be very restrictive. And they can write a law in such a way that you even wonder if we can do any research at all. So our government is silent on the matter in writing, but is very much aware that we exist and very much aware what we do. And I think it's worked pretty well. It's just that anybody who's a little bit wise will know that we really can't do anything about what we say. We don't have a stick. The only stick we have is that you probably can't publish unless you had ethics review committee.
Is that because of
approval?
Introducing it in international context, or why would that be a barrier?
It's just because the journals insist, isn't
see.
it, that you need an ethics review committee approval. So we have had people come and say, oh, we did this research and then we wanted to go and publish and they've told us we did an ethics review approval. Can you give us a letter in retrospect? We're like, no, it doesn't work like that. So you see, at least we can use that as a stick.
Right.
But there is no law. We can't, nobody will be arrested for carrying out research without approval. But I guess disapproval, public opinion is pretty powerful. Yes. And so we do have the power to blacklist. We do have the power to say that so-and-so will no longer do research in Kenya because of the following reasons, and send it out to the Ministry of Health, copy to the minister, copy to this, copy to that, which we've never had to do. But our government is silent. Yes. I think for the very serious scientists who want to make a career out of research, we don't need much, because they do so need the approval of their fellow scientists. They do need to publish. And to publish, you need to at least appear to have followed the rules, GCP and what have you. So from that point of view, from the serious scientists, the people who are genuinely passionate about science, I don't see us having much of a problem. They sort of like self-right themselves. But for the cowboys, the cowboys who think maybe it's business, and, who get excited by Gallup polls and say so many Kenyans said this and so many Kenyans said that, and they're thinking, oh, I could do that. Just go and ask a bunch of people a bunch of questions and I'm popular. All of a sudden I'm on the news. Or I could make money from this. Those are the ones to be careful. And those are the ones that we need a stick for. But I have never really thought about it. So I just don't know what kind of stick. I've never really sat down and thought to myself, what would I do? And maybe I can discuss this with my chairman. He's around and he's a lawyer, and ask him what he'd do.
But it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is that mostly overall, it works just by value of peer pressure and
Yes.
public opinion and
Yes.
institutions,
Yes.
which is great.
Yes.
I wonder, what do you think? Well, if the Kenyan government is silent, where have you developed? Of course, they're not coming from thin air, but are there other resources that you turn to for guidance?
Oh yeah, we've got lots of guidance. Even our own institute has written guidelines for research. Our National Council for Science and Technology have written some. Because of vaccine trials for HIV, there are all kinds of guidelines, just Kenyan ones for that matter, that we go by. Then of course, the other guidelines like the Nuremberg Code and Helsinki and SIOMS and what have you, although we can't keep up with their changes. You just master the document and suddenly there's another change. So we've fallen back to that. Collaborative research has helped a lot, because you do research with Americans, you do research with Europeans, and they tell you that, of course, you're going to have informed consent. And you're like, of course, yes, we are. Then you go back, what is informed consent? So, you come for such meetings and you begin to realize it's a whole world out there that you didn't know anything about. So that has helped. And, we don't live in a vacuum. And we've gone to school to study ethics and what have you. So in our own little world, I think we are quite on point. And maybe the next step is to get the government on point as well. But as I said, yesterday I learned it can be tricky. When I first came for the first meeting here at Prima, I found that there were so many regulations. And I really wondered how IRB administrators navigated them all. and didn't break them all. It reminded me of my secondary school, where before breakfast time you could have broken 26 rules. There were 26 rules you could break before you had your breakfast. And it did help. We broke them anyway. And I'm not sure, and I think I've heard even Americans themselves complain, that it's been very helpful. Almost having a regulation for everything, and that means then you're not given time to think. And it's not good not to be able to think. Just to say, I did it because it's in the regulations, I did it because I've been told. You should be able to think and to realize, to ask yourself that, why are we doing this and how can we do it better? Because if you're just going to go by the rules, then you're bound by how much the person who wrote the rules was thinking about the issue. And not all circumstances, not all situations are going to be able to fit into those neat little boxes that they give you, you see. So I don't know. I can't answer that question about what they could learn from us. I just find that it's a little bit, there's more air in Kenya. There's more space, let me call it that. There's more space to maneuver in Kenya. And we don't have an OHRP. We're not living in any kind of fear that they're going to come and close anything down. And I'm also trying very hard not to give that impression that the ERC is just walking around with a big stick trying to find out which study they are going to close down. I try very, very hard to tell people that no, we're on the same side. Let's see if we can think through this problem and get a solution. I'm sure there's a solution. If you are thinking and I'm thinking, we'll come to a solution to this problem. And that gives us space to look for options. But when you just have rules, then you're just looking for the rule. Then if you're a human being, you're looking for a way of going around the rule.
Right. It sounds like part of what you're saying is that with such a sort of up to your ears level of regulation, sometimes not only can creativity kind of be stifled, but even ethical thinking can be, if you're only compliance minded, of course. There's one topic that's a sort of a hot topic that's being discussed and debated here at Primer that I would like to get your take on. There's a lot of discussion here and in other forums about central review versus decentralized review. And I wonder if you have any experience or any comments you can share on that subject.
It seems to be the topic of the month, really, because we were in a meeting in Entebbe last month, AVRF meeting. This is the African vaccine group meeting. The guys who are in charge of that is the WHO. And there was that huge discussion about multi-center trials. Vaccine trials obviously are usually multi-center, multi-country. And they were asking us, why must we all review the same proposal? It gets to a point when you're not adding any value. So why can't we just have one IRB review that proposal and we can all agree to it? And I can tell you, the regulators didn't seem to have a problem with it, but the IRB members who are there, we all had a problem with it. And so they asked me, Caroline, why? Why don't you think so? And I said, let's just take children. The assent age for children. Let's just take that one. In some places, 7. In some places, 12. In some places, there's nothing like assent age. I mean, you're a child until you're 18. There's no question of asking you whether or not you want to be in a study. You're a child. It's just ask the parent. The parent knows what is good for the child. The parent can never want ill for their child. So I said, if a proposal was to come from a drug company and one IRB was to review it, and that IRB said that the age of assent was 7, well, what does that mean? We'd be up in arms in the countries where we say 12 and in the countries where they say 18. So central review, there was actually a presentation about that, which I opted not to go for because I wanted to hear about something else. But I think it would have been very interesting because somebody's actually done a study to see whether it was actually helpful. Central versus devolved, for lack of a better word. But then somebody else suggested that perhaps if we have a multi-center trial and a multi-country, that representatives from each IRB can be sent, let's say, to one of the countries, and we all sat together and looked at the proposal at the same time. Then I'll be able to say 7 is out. Our country is 12. And somebody else will say 12 is out. In our country, it's 18. And we'd sit down and say, okay, let's think about this. There's the law, and then there's the reality. So how are we going to organize this? So I thought that would be very interesting, and I thought that would be very useful. But you'd still have to have representatives, I think. For me, that's how it would work. So you want to do a microbicide trial? Get us all together, all the countries. If it's South Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya, get us all together plus all the sites. We all sit together in one room. We were all given the proposal. Then we all now just sort of like have an IRB meeting where you say, okay, these are the issues that I found, and go back and forth on it until we can agree in principle. Then we can go back home. I think that would work.
So the principle of justice instructs us not only that we should do research that benefits all populations, we shouldn't just do research to benefit one small fraction, but also that we shouldn't do research that burdens only one population either. And especially as we begin to have more and more research in international contexts or research across international lines, there is a risk of overburdened research populations. And is that an issue that you have encountered in your ERC work?
A lot. We had a science congress for journalists who report on science. And a journalist came up to me and asked me, what are the ethical issues of research in Kenya? And I thought, oh, what does that mean really? Do you have a year, 2 years, 10 years? Anyway. And one of them is over-researching of specific populations. Now, the context is this. Creating cohorts that you can study is not easy. Being able to know where people are. In our countries, in Africa, you don't get your mail at your doorstep because there is no PO, that's why we have PO boxes. In the village, you can't find us. We're not on maybe Google Maps would find us, but we don't have that kind of system where you can find people. So when a sponsor comes into an area and they develop a DHSS, and they know where people are, and they know generally what kind of population they are dealing with, and they know the prevalence of various diseases. It's very difficult for anybody to understand why you tell them to get up and go somewhere else. So take, for example, the PrEP studies, Partners PrEP, Fem PrEP. They've all been done in one region in our country. And now we are trying to roll out the demonstration of PrEP. We can't find participants. Because you can't be in that study if you are in the Fem PrEP and if you are in the Partners PrEP. So we've kind of run out of them. And they're looking for ways to get them out of the woodwork. But I have a funny feeling they are finished. They are no longer anymore. But if they were just to go to the next province, they're probably going to find a good number. But they've invested buildings. They even build buildings, some of these sponsors. Time. They have employed people. They have people on their payroll, people they understand. They have people in the community, the leaders and the gatekeepers who are well known to them. And to ask them to go and start all over again in a new place, to them just sounds like a lot of money. So what happens is that we just go to the same populations, and I really do feel they are over-researched. And benefit, we accept. We all benefit. Burdens, that's not fair. The same people are being prodded, are being injected, are being given drugs, are being asked questions. Come on now. That's not justice. And I've just been thinking about a study where we can look at those issues of justice. And I was happy to hear it being mentioned just in the meeting, the session I've just come from. So yes, I think the burden is being put overly on certain populations. I mean, they used to say it's because they have the highest HIV prevalence, for example. True enough. But it's not so low in other places. Yes, you'll have to walk a little bit longer, a little bit further. So I was just thinking about catering in our country, just to give you an illustration. These days we have outside catering for weddings, for funerals, for baby showers, for everything. It's just too much of a hassle. So if you have a little bit of money in your pocket, instead of borrowing saucepans from your neighbors and getting all your little nephews and nieces to come and help you cook, you just hire it out. Now, I know of a caterer who was thinking of getting a truck, a covered truck, so that he could come with everything. You just drive into your, instead of cooking the food somewhere else and bringing it, or trying to get fireplaces in your compound, you just drive in, and his truck would have the fire and everything to do the cooking. So he would just do everything there. So if we could have that also for research. So we had trucks that were self-contained, and you just had to drive to another part of the country, and in a very short while, you could set up, and, do your research. It might help. Of course, community engagement is another story entirely. You need to take your time to do that. But it's not going to be long before some of these over-researched populations are not going to be yielding good results. Yeah, because even right now they have to use fingerprinting technology because there's a lot of overlap between various studies in the same area, and you find somebody double, triple, quadruple enrolling.
Well, I like that metaphor that you've used about, how can we make research something that fits on a truck and can be driven to different parts of the country? I wonder also on the other end, are there ways that you think we can engage the community to either make the process of engaging with the community easier, or create more sort of solidarity to protect against the overburdening by research?
Yes, I think we can use our Public Health Act to do that. But again, as I said, our government knows we exist, but doesn't really know we exist. We don't exist on paper, we exist in actual fact. So the Public Health Act would help, because in the Public Health Act, you're allowed to make announcements. You're allowed to say certain things. You can have campaigns, on the radio. You can get comedians to talk about it, like we once did when the HIV menace was at its peak. And, have people act out stories. What is research? What are they talking about? I understand somebody's in a study. What does that mean? And, we listen a lot as Kenyans, and we talk a lot. Now with social media, it's become ridiculous. There's all kinds of conversations taking place. And I think we can educate if we wanted to. If we just decided that that was our priority, we would. But I don't even know if the Ministry of Health, Public Health senior officer realizes that research is a public health issue. I don't think so. I think he doesn't connect the two. Educating the community about research and solve it. And I'm sure some members of the public will come up with some very interesting ways that we can stop some of these few elements that we have in our country. We always imagine it's only in the mind of a scientist, but it could be in the mind of a layperson, the solution. A very simple solution to a problem, because as one of the keynote speaker was saying, when you keep on looking at the failures, when you keep track of the failures, you just might see the pattern as to why those failures are occurring. And I think people who live their lives daily and keep on noticing the same thing, at one point we wake up in the morning and say, you know what, if we just did it this way, we'd get the solution. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we've delved a lot into your comparative experience of research ethics across cultural and national lines, and I'd like to take this breadth of your experience and focus back on you personally a bit. What are your, if it's not too daunting to answer, what are your goals regarding your career in research and bioethics, and what do you think you can accomplish? Where do you see yourself going in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, we've been doing research, I do not want to say in a haphazard manner, but almost in a haphazard manner. The other day I got a request that, can you give us the titles and the proposals that have had anything to do with sexual and reproductive health? just give us the titles, and then after that, give us the proposals. We want to look at the objectives because we want to see what kind of research we've been doing and see where we need to emphasize, where there are gaps in the research. And I think the Ethics Review Committee is in a very good place to tell people the direction research has taken in our country and to advise the government about areas that have been neglected. And the only way we can do that is by keeping good records. So in as much as we love writing in those books, we have to find a way of typing into computers instead and allowing the machine to do the routine things, so that we can free our minds to think of other things. So in the next 10 years, what I'd like to see is I'd like us to be able to comment on public health issues as an ethics committee and say, you know what, we've been doing this, we've been doing that, we found out this and we found out that. Maybe we need to do a bit more of this. We have many universities that are mushrooming now in our country. Kenyans we're a certificate country. The more certificates you are, the better that you have, the better you feel. But again, a lot of research is being done by students. Some of it is humdrum, but some of it I think is really good. And it's just going onto shelves. It's literally just going onto shelves and being forgotten. That's another way I think ethics committee can say that there seems to be something interesting that has been going on. Because what happens is that because they are students, they don't have a lot of time to do their research. So a lot of their work is laboratory. A lot of their work is using stored samples. And I'm sure they're coming up with very good answers, but we have no way of capturing that data and putting it in some sort of meta-analysis. It's not published. It's published in a thesis, but it's not out there for people to look at. As we were being told this morning, you need knowledge and you need, ignorance and ineptitude. So you don't want ignorance, you don't want ineptitude. So there's a lot of knowledge in our country, but it's on shelves. We need to find a way of getting it where somebody can look at it and see trends. How we're going to do that, I think our .com generation, I'll let them think about that. I was born before computers, but at least I can give them the idea. So I think that's where ethics committees can go, because we do receive people's ideas in those proposals. Some of them come out with something, some of them don't. But see, the idea was there. But now what is happening is that a lot of work is being repeated. And we're not building upon what we learned last year, because we don't even know what we learned last year, because we don't have a database. So if all ethics committees could be encouraged and helped to get those databases, and then we'll just have now that knowledge. I think if we were to sit down and just look at all the knowledge we'd have, we'd say, okay, no more research, let's just apply a third of this knowledge, and it would really get us places. So I think that's where we will be. As for ethics, then of course we don't do research in ethics. So that's something we have to start doing. Like this issue of overburdening. We need to start doing that, and finding out new ways of getting study populations that are in different parts of the country, so that more people can get the burden of the research, as we all benefit from the research. So that's another thing I'd like us to see in 5 to 10 years. We do more research in ethics. Yeah. Yeah.
And, well, I just want to touch back on something you just said about how ERCs can be involved in helping researchers or the public understand what's already been done. I mean, I think that is an ethical issue in some dimension, because part of determining the ethical nature of research's equipoison is risk, if there is any warranted for the benefits. But of course, if there's sort of too much overlap or too much duplicative research, that makes the risk less justified, right?
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And we'll just have to bite the bullet and say, no, sorry, honey, you can't do that. It's already been done. yeah, maybe you could do something else, and you can't lack something to do. So this has been bothering me for many years, and I said we just have to get our act together. My sister came for her undergraduate at the Stanford University, and she had a scholarship, but she was allowed to work. Just the scholarship didn't cover pocket money, and one of the things they did was put barcodes on all of the books in the library. How helpful is that? So when you come, you're not looking in a book, you've not written it down, the book and what, you just, put this machine on it and it tells you immediately. But it was drudge work, just coming every day in the morning and, and putting in the computer and connecting the barcode to the title. It was a lot of drudge work, but isn't it awesome that they did that? Because now when you go to the library in Stanford, they have thousands of books, but it's not going to take you a long time to find out which book it is. So it's something which will be quite a lot of work and very boring, maybe, but I think it's worth it. I think it is worth it to know what have we done. Yes, because we are wasting people's brains even just repeating something that was done before.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's nobody's dream job, but it's an important task to get done.
It's nobody's dream job, but yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so now sort of zooming back out again, what do you think we need to learn about research? What does the public need to know about how research is done now? You can talk about at home or in international contexts or both or neither.
The other day, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who's a GM specialist, genetically modified organism specialist. And I was saying that sometimes I wonder whether people even know, the people in our ethics committee, even know why we do research. And just like, oh, come on. Why it was so obvious why people should do it. It's for the good of humanity. It's for progress. It's so many things we've learned out of research, penicillin and what have you. But I sometimes wonder whether we understand why we need this knowledge. Or is it that you were just born and you found people going in a certain direction and you don't know where you're going. You just know you're getting there very quickly. That kind of thing. So I'm not very sure people understand. I'm not very sure scientists understand. As I said, in our country, depending on the number of points you got or how well you did, you'd go in certain directions. So if you are very clever, you'd become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. If you are not so clever, you became a teacher. If you're blah, blah, blah. And then if you are not clever at all, you became a secretary. It used to be something like that. So in the end, you become a scientist, but you don't know why. Mostly it's because you did BSc and you need to eat. So you get a job in a research institution and you're told we are researching on this and you just carry on. But you just don't know why you are doing that research. Why are you trying to answer that question? So what if you didn't answer it? What would happen? Because I don't think people think of those kind of things. So I said if we never got a vaccine for HIV, then what would happen? So when you realize what would happen, then you say, we need to work harder to get this vaccine for HIV. But if you're just saying that I'm doing this because it's my job, I need to feed my family, this continuing medical education, at home we say children must eat. You see, meaning is internal and individual. So if it's just that's what you're doing. And sometimes I get that feeling. Sometimes I get that feeling people are doing MPHs just to get certificates so that they can be promoted. And they just don't understand the philosophy of looking for knowledge. They say knowledge is power, but I don't know if they know what that means. Mm-hmm. Yes. So from ethics committees to researchers to sponsors. Yes, they are, of course, children must eat, I accept. But there has to be a higher calling. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And if I did not do it, what would happen? And if I do it, what will happen? And if I fail while doing it, I'll have made progress, but towards what? you know? So maybe it's because I've been at the ethics committee now for 9 years, and maybe it's because we're having new members and I'm seeing them struggle that I've begun to think about these things.
I would like to touch back on that. You've seen probably many new members come into your ERC now. Do you feel you can mentor them, or what strategies do you use to mentor them?
I was thinking about each one of them the other day. I would love to mentor them. I would love to sit down with them when they are doing their CT. And I would love for them to read and then for us to discuss what they've read before they answer the questions. Because with CT, if you're an intelligent person, you'll get to a point where you can actually do the questions before you even read. I don't know what happens with these things. Very quickly, you know how to navigate it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a weakness in online kind of things. I would love to do that. I was telling another member here that our reverend is really struggling. I can see he's struggling. He keeps quiet in the meetings most of the time. And we had another lay person who literally kept quiet for 6 years, never said a word. Then he went for a course in South Africa, and at least now he could open his mouth and say something. And I was thinking that I would like to ask for permission from my boss and say, can you give me time just to go and sit down with Reverend and we can discuss some of these things. We can go through a proposal. I can tell him, here's a proposal, I'm going through the same proposal. He can come up with his issues, I come up with my issues, and then I can explain to him how come I saw those issues. I would love to do that. But in African culture, older people than you respect them. You need to be careful. Let me just put it that way. You need to be careful not to sound condescending and supercilious. But it's something now that you've mentioned it, because I was thinking about it and you've allowed me to voice it, I might now send an email to my boss and say, boss, what do you think? You know, because we have a meeting once a month, 3 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours on a Tuesday. That's not enough. It's not enough to learn ethics. It might be enough to be taught ethics, but it's not enough time to learn ethics. And if you could just allow me, I wouldn't mind making a roster and then even asking them, telling them any question, or give them a paper and telling them, something like a book club, journal club, just to, jot the sort of like spark their thinking. Yeah.
Are there topics that you would like to discuss that I haven't asked about? I know there's a whole world we haven't touched.
Not really. As usual, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go.
Me neither.
When you asked me about the question, I didn't think it was going to be this philosophical. I thought it was going to be more practical. But it's been a bit philosophical.
Are there we could touch back on some of the practical pieces.
Oh no, I think it's been an interesting conversation.
I think it has.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me while you're here. It's been so instructive and thought-provoking. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.